You all know I'm only into making recipes that are worth the calories. So today we're gonna be making the tea ring. I learned how to make this recipe from my grandma Sonja in Minnesota. It's a Scandinavian recipe, and this is the type of sweet treat that you're gonna make, and it's gonna be gone in minutes. So we're gonna start making our own dough by scratch. I know this can sound intimidating, but it's gonna be really easy, so let's get started. I've got a 1.5 cups of warm water here. I'm just gonna pour it into a mixing bowl. And then I'm actually gonna take 1 packet of yeast. This is Fleshman's Rapid Rise yeast. You can use many different brands, but what I'm gonna do is just sprinkle this yeast into the warm water mixture, just making sure I'm coating the top of the water. Now you're gonna be able to smell the yeast right away, and you're gonna notice that it's gonna start foaming slightly as well, and that means that the yeast is working, so that's a really good sign. I'm also going to add 3 heaping tablespoons of sugar to our yeast and water mixture. We're gonna begin to add a 1/4 cup of melted butter, and this is gonna add even more flavor. A very important step in this recipe is measuring the salt. We're gonna add 1.5 teaspoons of salt that I've already measured out. So the yeast is starting to work into the butter, the sugar, the salt, the water, and now it's time to form more of a dough. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take 3 cups of flour, and I'm gonna measure this right here. Make sure to level each one. We are most likely going to be adding more flour to this as well, because we want to form this into a very good looking dough, and we want it to be sticky, but we also want it to be flexible. We want this to be a soft and sweet dough. I'm just gonna take a little bit of flour and sprinkle it into the dough mixture. And I'm just gonna use my hands to just coat the dough. So it's gonna be a little fun to get your hands dirty here. Sometimes your hands are your best tool when you're baking. It kind of depends on the recipe. I'm gonna keep adding more flour. I'm even gonna add just a sprinkle of flour on the bottom, just to make sure it's not sticking to the pan. Ooh, do you see that? This is the consistency that we're looking for. I know that this looks a little bit messy. It's crumbling in some areas, but ultimately it's soft, it's got buoyancy, it's flexible, it's slightly wet, but it's not going to be too sticky that it sticks all over the pan. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cover this up with a cloth, and we are going to let it sit for 1 hour in a warm spot. I'm gonna check on this in about 30 minutes though, just to make sure it doesn't get too high in the rise. And then we will begin rolling out our dough, putting some cinnamon sugar on it, and I will show you guys the next step. I'm gonna begin to stretch this dough out onto the counter, and then I'll show you guys what we're gonna do in a second. What I've done is I have just patted this dough down into a rectangular type shape. You don't want it to be too wide. And then you're gonna sprinkle some cinnamon and sugar all over this. And you don't wanna skimp. So be very heavy with your application of the cinnamon and sugar, and it's gonna be so good. I'm gonna start rolling the dough. And what you're just gonna do is you're gonna just pull it under. And again, getting your hands dirty, this is good. And we're gonna continue to roll until we get to the other side. What we're just gonna do is toss this on here, but essentially I want the seam to be at the bottom of the tea ring, okay? And we are going to form this into a little bit of a semicircle. We have placed the tea ring on the pan. We've made sure everything is together, and now we need to score the tea ring just so that it has air in order to rise. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take the scissors and I'm gonna start making little inserts all around the tea ring, just on the top. Now, another important note about this is you don't want to make a cut right where you connected the two ends. Leave that cinched because that's gonna hold everything together. So there's no rhyme or reason to this. Obviously, you're not cutting through the entire tea ring. You're just making little tiny inserts right in the top. I think that looks really good. I've let the tea ring rise for about 45 minutes. I wanna show you what it looks like a little bit closer up here. Gosh, that's gorgeous. You could see the cinnamon coming through, love it. So now I'm gonna put this tea ring in the oven for 350 degrees for about 20 minutes, and it will come out nice and golden brown, and then we're gonna frost this. So I took the tea ring out of the oven after 30 minutes. Now I know I originally said 20, and this is a good lesson just to make sure you're checking the tea ring consistently to see if it needs a little bit more time. The way you can tell that the tea ring is done is by looking at the coloring of the tea ring itself. It needs to be that golden brown color, and then you know that you're good to go and you can take it out of the oven. This is the powdered sugar, butter, vanilla, and a little bit of milk. The amount of frosting that you're making depends on how much frosting you love. So this is supposed to be more of a glaze. I do understand that some people love layering on the frosting, and that's great too. So you might have to mix more frosting if this isn't enough for you. I just got done frosting the tea ring, and I wanna show you what it looks like, the finished product. Here we go. The frosting looks beautiful. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect. There's butter, powdered sugar in that frosting. It's so yummy. So again, this recipe is from my grandma Sonja, and it's called the tea ring. The last thing I'll say is it's definitely worth the calories.